Welcome to today's edition of Daytime Dialogues. It's a pleasure to be able to welcome an old friend, Rabbi David Fine, who's joining us from his home in Israel. It is a pleasure because we've known each other for a long time. Rabbi Fine is a former rabbi, both in Milwaukee and in Overland Park, Kansas. He and I, 17 years ago, were together in the March of the Living when he was leading the group from Kansas City and I was leading the group from Chicago. And since he made Aliyah in 2008, Rabbi Fine has been involved in a fascinating organization known as Barkai. Barkai has been working with Israeli rabbis to bring them more into the mold of American communal rabbis versus what is more common there. And I want to spend some time talking with Rabbi Fine about that today. So Rabbi, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Rabbi Matanki. It's always a pleasure.
So let's jump right into it. You made Aliyah in 2008. You moved, did you initially move to Modi'in or you were somewhere else first?
I moved to Modi'in right away, yes.
Right, you moved to Modi'in.
I happen to be in Yerushalayim at this second, but I live in Modi'in.
And you encountered Israeli synagogues as a balabas for the first time, coming from being a prominent rabbi in the Midwest. What were the things that were so different?
So the truth of the matter is that my specific shul in Modi'in is very, very Anglo. I always used to say that I had more Israelis in my shul in Kansas City than I do in Modi'in. But the other shuls in the area, in our neighborhood, are all Israelis. And to just summarize, I said, to put it in one sentence, shul in Israel, first of all, over 95% of the shuls in Israel do not have any rabbi. Most people don't know that. And in general, a shul is a place to daven, maybe have an occasional shiur class or something like that. But really, it's not the center of the community at all in the ways like in the United States or in really anywhere in the world.
So how do members of the Dati community, the Haredi community, how do they seek out a rabbi if they need a psak, if they need advice, if they need those kinds of things that we're so familiar with in the diaspora?
Right. Well, I don't really consider myself aware enough, knowledgeable enough of what's really going on inside the Haredi community. But the Dati Leumi community, I mean, many people are still connected to their rabbeim from the yeshivot Hesder, yeshivot Kvohot that they went to. But in many instances, unfortunately, they've lost connections to rabbis and don't really have any connections to a rabbi. And that's one of the reasons that we founded Barkai, in order to provide people like that with the rabbinic support and assistance that they need.
So you're focusing on that 5% of the synagogue rabbis. You also work with the 95, with all of the other rabbis who are involved with people's lives, but not in shuls.
So right now, we're just focusing on the rabbis that are in synagogues that have already found their way into synagogue employment in some way, shape, or form. And they just don't necessarily have the training or the skills that are really needed in order to serve as a rabbi, as a pastor. And that they also don't really understand the model of a North American community because they didn't grow up with that model. So they're humongous Talmidei Chachamim. Most of the rabbis in Barkai have learned for far more years in yeshiva than you or I. Well, I don't know about you, but me. And the average number of years in yeshiva and of these rabbis is far greater than rabbis coming from America. They're very smart. They have tons of Mesirut Nefesh. So I'm not necessarily trying to say anything negative about them, but they just didn't grow up with this model. And there's no required rabbinic training in order to get smicha in Israel from the Rabbanut HaRashit. So they don't necessarily have some of the skills that most decent North American rabbis do have.
So was Barkai started because you saw the need once you made Aliyah, or did you already have this in mind when you were making Aliyah?
I did some other things, other jobs before I made Aliyah, before I started Barkai, when I first made Aliyah. And I worked for Eretz Chemda, which we all know well. And I also worked in the Matnas, in the community center in Modi'in, doing some Jewish identity work with secular people. But neither of those jobs were really, I wanted to try to make a major contribution to Israeli society, and I didn't necessarily feel like I was doing that, although these are both wonderful, wonderful institutions. And it's a long story how Bar Kai got started, but the rabbi of my shul, it's actually an interesting story, but I'll just tell it briefly. The rabbi of my shul, Rav Shlomo Sobel, who is an 11th generation Yerushalmi, went to Merkaz Harav for 10 years, served in the army, and had never left Israel until he was in his early 30s. He left Israel with his wife and 2 young children, went to Detroit, Michigan for 4 years, where he was the Rosh Kollel of the Torah Mitzion Kollel, which unfortunately doesn't exist in Detroit. I know it very successfully still exists in Chicago. And as he tells it, he grew up in Katamon, and he didn't know what a Jewish community was until he went to Detroit. So when he came back to Israel, he became the rabbi of our shul in Modi'in, but he also had in the back of his mind to start something like Bar Kai. So I was once talking to him, trying to get some advice and about what I should do. I was talking to everybody, networking. And at the end, he told me that I could do what most American rabbis do in Israel, fundraise for an organization or teach in seminaries or those kinds of things. And, I'd heard that before. And he said to me, well, ever since I got back from Detroit, I've had this idea of starting an institution which can create the kinds of communities that are needed in Israel. Because truth be told, and I speak about this when I speak, all across America, when I do go speaking and fundraising, most people don't know this. Most Israelis don't know this, that Ben Gurion really wanted to do away with the whole idea, the whole notion of the Jewish community, very purposefully. He wrote about it. And he believed that the community was a thing of the exile, of the Galut, and it was the old Jew. And in order for Israel to really succeed, the government, the state, had to provide all services, and that included community services, and just like it includes security and the economy and the roads and the healthcare and education and all that. And that's really where the breakdown of community happened upon the founding of the state of Israel. And well, obviously, I wouldn't be sitting here. I doubt I would be sitting here in Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh if it wasn't for David Ben Gurion. So I have nothing bad to say about him. But at the time, it seemed like the right kind of thing to do. But the truth of the matter is that we all know that people need community. People need the support and the friendship and the love. And I always say there are religious Jews in Israel, in the Dati Leumi world, that go to shul 3 times a day, that learn Torah regularly, that are observant, very, very strictly, and they don't live in a Jewish community. Because if their wife has a baby or their parent dies, God forbid, there's no one that knows about that. There's no one, obviously people talk in shul, but there's no system in order to do those kinds of things that you do so well, and our American, colleagues, the basis of which community is built on in America. So I hope that wasn't too long of an answer.
No, it's not too long, but it's fascinating in the sense that my impression of many of the Israeli rabbis who serve in shuls is that they are less than part-time rabbis.
So that's a very important, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a very important fact.
So how do they do it? Yeah. So how do they create those communities?
Is that the whole idea, the whole notion of a pulpit rabbi as an official job, like it exists in America or anywhere outside of Israel until throughout the whole exile, doesn't exist in Israel, meaning it's not a recognized position. So these rabbis that are in Bar Kai, so far we've trained over 100 rabbis who are, again, this is only for the Israeli community, not the Anglo world, because the Anglo world sort of gets it. So we have rabbis in Dimona and Netanya and all over the place, Kiryat Gat, and you name it, Ramla, Lod, we're all over the place. And except for one of our rabbis who also happens to be a lawyer. So no, he works in law during the week and is the rabbi on Shabbat, but all the rest of them are in education. But the basic point is that I'm trying to make is that every single one of them has another full-time job, because the shuls don't pay their rabbis. And one of the things we're trying to develop is that the community needs to take responsibility for their rabbis' salaries. Now, some of them are being paid like 3,000, 4,000 shekel at the most a month, which is not nearly enough in order to support their families. So they have to have other full-time jobs. And you and I know what it's like to be a rabbi. I mean, it's 24/7. And if there's such a thing as a part-time rabbi, I always say it's only part-time pay, but a full-time job. And so if they're working in a high school teaching somewhere and, Uncle Shimon passes away, God forbid, the family is going to expect them to be there. But so it's a very, very difficult balancing act. And what we're trying to do is create community and create the kind of community that understands that part of its obligation and responsibility is to have a rabbi that will that they will support and not make work, do the other things that they're doing.
But aren't you making it more complicated for the rabbis, meaning that you're showing them a model of something that they can't necessarily fulfill? They can create all of those things, but still be making their 3,000 or 4,000 shekel a month.
Right. So somehow, some way, they're finding the time and the ability to create it. Now, listen, they aren't available 24/7 like an American rabbi may be. And they're certainly not doing all the programs that I know, your shul and other shuls like it are doing, but they're finding the way. Again, these rabbis have a tremendous Mesirut Nefesh. I mean, these rabbis living in Lod and Ramla and all these different places, and especially in the mixed, Arab and Israeli cities, they have tremendous Mesirut Nefesh. So they're very, very committed to it. And most of them are working 24/7 and more between their job that they get paid for and they're wrapping it. So yes, in some ways we are making it more complicated, but they want it to be more complicated. When we started our program, we were afraid that rabbis weren't going to come, right? We said that we wanted to start the first group. I could explain to you how it works in terms of the classes, because if they are working full time, how do they ever come to classes? But we wanted to start with 20, and we said we would start with 10. We put one little ad in one of the Alonei Shabbat, the magazines that are given out in the synagogues on Shabbat. One little ad in one of the Alonei Shabbat, and in 3 days we had 60 applications. Within a week we had 150 applications, and I had contracted 3 weeks of advertising. I canceled it, the Wednesday before the second Shabbat. So obviously, we are making it more complicated, but the rabbis want it to be more complicated.
So when you want to create community, what is the first thing you tell these rabbis to do? Is there something that begins to turn the tide?
So many of these rabbis that come to us are already community minded, and they're open to it, because if not, they wouldn't come to us. But we actually Rabbi Sobel and I spent 14 months preparing a curriculum before we started. And we crisscrossed Israel and the world, actually, speaking to all kinds of different experts. And we developed a curriculum. And the first class that Rav Sobel and I teach, meaning the other classes like mental health and marriage counseling, those are mental health professionals and therapists and all kinds of people like that. But the first class we actually developed and we teach, because we have a lot of experience between the two of us, it's called Community. And we have like 9 sessions where we discuss what community is historically and what it's meant throughout the ages, and how you build community, different methodologies. We do have a sociologist, Dr. Shai Ben Yosef, who in Israel is recognized in the Dati Leumi community as being one of the experts on, perhaps the biggest expert on community development in Israel. And so we just start very, very slowly. I'll tell you again, some of it is very basic for an American rabbi or an American audience. The fact that the rabbis need to call their congregants before specific, life cycle events, or meet with their congregants' children before their bar and bat mitzvahs. Again, you and I hearing that would think that that's crazy. Of course, every rabbi knows that you have to do that. But if that's not the world that you come from, and you just come from a place where most shuls don't even have any rabbi, and most bar mitzvah kids are not meeting with any rabbi before bar mitzvah, that's news to you.
And are there things that the rabbis have been more shocked about, your participants, versus, oh, that's a good idea? Is there something that you propose, they say, well, why? Or they push back, or just, oh my God?
Yeah, we get a lot of pushback at the beginning from, it's a 2-year program, just so people know. They come 1 full day a week for 7 hours every Monday, and that's when they learn. They come to our shul in Modi'in, which happens to be where Rav Sobel and I live, but it's also very centrally located, Highway 6 and the train, and it's right in the middle of the country. And at the beginning, we do get a lot of pushback to several things. I'll give you one very good example. We're trying to bring to Israel, together with other organizations, the idea of chaplaincy, mostly in hospitals. If you think that rabbis, congregational rabbis, pulpit rabbis, in Israel, we call them rabbanei kehilot, community rabbis, is not very well developed. Well, hospital rabbis are, we're like developed till the nth degree compared to that. So we're trying to bring that to Israel. And it's very much based on what we call CPE in America, clinical pastoral education, which if anyone is familiar with that, it's very, very, very touchy-feely, I would say, and where you have to like really talk about yourself and be very open emotionally and all that. And at the beginning, the rabbis are not very interested in that, right? First of all, they think it's like some conservative and reform thing. But a lot of these rabbis have been in yeshiva, and they're men in Israel, in the army, very tough Israelis, tzabras, prickly on the outside. And some of them have actually never ever spoken about themselves to such a great degree. So the truth of the matter is that a lot of our rabbis tell us, forget about my shul and forget about my family and forget about my community. I'm happy I did this for me. Like, I've learned so much about myself. And the rabbis that complain about the chaplaincy course, for example, a few years later, I get calls after every single machzor, every single cycle of the rabbis, because it's a 2-year cycle. They come every Monday for 2 full years. It's over 600 hours of training. I get calls after every machzor telling me that, oh yeah, I didn't think that we needed it, but now I see that it's great. And that happens all the time. Again, like I said before, thankfully, they're mostly open to what we're trying to teach them. But again, a lot of it is very foreign because they didn't grow up with it.
Do you have any idea of how many synagogues there are in Israel?
That's a very good question. I heard on the radio yesterday that Bibi Netanyahu nominated a new guy to be the head of the there's a statistica, I don't know what you call it in English, like a statistics bureau in Israel. It's a national part of the government. And we've often tried to work with them and contact them in order to establish that number. And we've been stymied. We've done all kinds of research. And the problem is that, take a place like Modi'in, where I live, for example. There are over 100,000 people that live in Modi'in. Modi'in was built to be a secular city, and there was no shuls built from the beginning. They all had to be added afterwards. And so shuls are in schools and in ganim and in bomb shelters and in all kinds of places like that. So, and certainly after COVID, there are all kinds of, pickup minyanim. So I think it's very, very, there may be somebody that knows the answer to that. I think it's very difficult. I certainly don't.
And are Israeli rabbis, the interest from Israeli rabbis continuing to grow to be in the Machzorim? Do you still have that level of sign up like you had in the beginning?
Oh yeah, I mean, we got a little slowed down in COVID because people were afraid to actually come, and actually for part of COVID, like everyone else, we had to go to Zoom, but we tried to meet, when the shuls were closed, we met in like my backyard. We all did, we did everything according to the rules and laws and regulations, but we tried to meet as much as possible, but we're still getting a lot of requests and for joining. And the truth of the matter is that I don't know what it's like in America now, because I've been out of America for, this summer will be 15 years. But in Israel, the idea of community is a very, very popular thing now. And the truth of the matter is that in the secular world, it's also very, very important. And it's being spoken about all the time because secular Jews, Chiloni Jews, really don't have any community, right? So some of them have a community in their school, but that goes away after their kids graduate the school. And so the need for community, I believe, is a human need, not a religious need. And therefore, people who don't have that community, who don't have it built in like we do, are really searching for it. And one of the things we really, really work very hard on is to try to make the synagogue a synagogue for the entire neighborhood and not just for religious people. Now, I'm sure there are people that like drive to shul in your shul, I don't know, but in Kansas City and in Milwaukee where I was, people did. A lot of non-Orthodox and non-traditional and non-observant Jews came to my synagogue. Unfortunately, in Israel, as you probably know better than I, the secular religious divide is very, very strong, and many secular Jews would never think of coming to a rabbi for counseling or any kind of help like that. So we're working on it, but it's slow. Now, we're very into evolutionary change, not revolutionary change. It's another rabbi, another community, another set of Jews that are being affected. Like I said, we have over 100 rabbis now who are ministering to probably over 20,000 people, maybe even more. And I think that that's the only, when you're trying to create social change, which is very, very difficult to do, if it's even possible, I believe that it's this long-term evolutionary change that is going to actually affect change.
So if you look at how far Barkai has come, what are the things that you would like to be able to do besides expand the numbers? Are there things you can't do yet because Israeli community is not ready for it?
Yes, I would love to be able to be like an American rabbinical school in a lot of ways, meaning I'd like to take rabbis that are going to be rabbis that are not rabbis yet and be able to place them in synagogues. Now you have to train them a little differently because we did have a few rabbis in the first Machzor. Now we're up to Machzor Vav, and we had a few rabbis, and we realized that they weren't really understanding it because it was too theoretical for them since they weren't doing it. So we stopped accepting rabbis like that after the first Machzor, but I'd love to have a different kind of course for those kind of rabbis that will be placed in synagogues. But the whole idea of placing rabbis in synagogues here is, I wouldn't say it's non-existent because we've helped move it a little bit, but it's very, very difficult to do that. And to truth be told, sometimes when I'm fundraising, a donor will say to me, how many rabbis have you placed or whatever? So now a donor or a potential donor probably doesn't really understand the difficulty and almost the impossible nature of doing that. So I always say, look, just like a dentist goes to dental school and then becomes a dentist, and a lawyer goes to law school and then becomes a lawyer. So I'd like to be able to have rabbis go to rabbinical school, meaning get the practical training, not the yeshiva training, so that they could be rabbis, and then they wouldn't need as much help as we're giving the rabbis who have already started. And maybe they won't make some of the mistakes that some of our rabbis may have made before they started Barkai. And obviously we all continue to make mistakes, but hopefully they would have been less.
So when the rabbis come to you, how does a rabbi become a rabbi in Israel of a shul?
Right, so in order to become a rabbi in Israel, you have to take all the exams of the Rabbanut Harashit. Now, the basic level, the Yoreh Yoreh, is all the classic, the family purity and kashrut and Shabbat and mourning, Avelut, and all that. And once you take those exams, now you can only start studying for those exams after you've spent a minimum number in yeshiva just learning Gemara. And then when you take those exams, you get you have to meet with the chief rabbi, and then you get what's called a kosher l'rav shchuna, which means the ability to serve as a community rabbi, and then you're on your own, more or less.
Okay,
and
so how do you get to be a rabbi of a shul? You got the pieces of paper,
right? So the way until we started, and in many ways still, the way that rabbis became rabbis of shuls is that they would be smart. They would strategically investigate different cities, different communities, different yeshuvim, whatever they may be. And if they saw that there was a shul that didn't have a rabbi, they would basically move there. And I mean, it sounds almost crazy, and they would start going there for davening. And, pretty soon the people would learn that they're a rabbi, speak between Mincha and Mariv, then speak on Friday night, and then after a process of almost osmosis, they become the rabbi. You would be shocked. That's how many of our rabbis and many other rabbis have become rabbis in Israel.
Do shuls have boards? Do they have membership fees?
Right. So again, since we have so many applicants, we're able to pick from whoever we want, the best, who we think are the best of the best. But another advantage to having so many applicants is that we're able to pick all kinds of rabbis. And that's very good for our program because the rabbis learn from each other. So we have Sephardim and Ashkenazim and Yemenites and Russians and Ethiopians and from rich communities and poor communities, and you name it, we have it. And the answer to your question is there is no answer to your question. Meaning in some shuls, it's just like an American shul, it's an amutah, it's a registered nonprofit organization. They have a board and it works the way more or less like an American organization or American synagogue would work. But in some shuls, and this is actually a big problem, the gabbai, who we call, in the Israeli world, in the Dati Leumi world, they call the shul president a gabbai. So the gabbai of the shul sometimes just rules the shul with an iron hand. Even if it is a registered amutah nonprofit, he's still the one ruling it. And sometimes many shuls are not registered amutot, and you have these gabbais who, their father started the shul and now they took over, and it doesn't matter what the rabbi wants to do. And to be honest with you, sometimes we won't take a rabbi because we see that that's true. And if that's really true, then there's almost no way that the rabbi is going to succeed, because in order to succeed as a rabbi, you have to be able to work with your community. And so
we're almost out of time, but I'm going to ask a question, and I will say up front that it's not 100% fair. You were a candidate for the Knesset in the last election, but in Israel, Israelis take politics probably more seriously than religion. How do rabbis in Israel navigate the issue of the political divide within the religious community? How do you advise them?
Well, you're going to have to invite me back to another podcast
Okay.
in order to answer that question. But just briefly, not easily, I'll tell you that. And, and is a well-known Israeli journalist in the Dati Leumi world tweeted, how could Rabbi Fine run for Knesset? And he quoted the words of a very, very well-known and famous rabbi in the Dati Leumi world from years past, who said that there's no way that a rabbi could be a politician. And then someone reacted, someone I don't even know, reacted and said, what are you talking about? This rabbi says that rabbis should be politicians. So it's not easy. The whole question of rabbis and politics and rabbis speaking, people who are not running, who are not candidates, but rabbis speaking about politics from the pulpit, which is is an issue in both Israel and America. I don't have the time to really go into the details, but it was not easy.
And do rabbis address politics from the Bima?
Again, some do and some don't. Most of our rabbis, I would say, err on the side of caution and don't. But, it's a little different than America, because here, where do you really draw the line between religion and politics? So they're sometimes intertwined, and it's very difficult to divide it. So with everything that's going on now with the judicial reform, okay, so most people would probably say that that has no religious bearing and is just totally a political issue. We could talk about whether that's true, but many other areas of debate in Israel are certainly issues of both politics and religion. So it's a very difficult balance line to run in, whatever the word is, in America. It's even more difficult in Israel. And it's something that we speak about from time to time, but we try actually not to speak about politics all that much, because we try to accept rabbis from the left to the right of the Dati Leumi world, what we call the consensus, yeshivot hesder. And we have rabbis who believe this, and we have rabbis who believe that, and we're not interested in any of that. And I get called by newspapers all the time. Could you comment on this? Could you comment on that? And television programs. And I would probably be able to raise money much more easily if I agreed to do this. But I said, because reporters are always looking to get rabbis to say stupid things and all that kind of thing in Israel. But we're not interested in any of that. and that's why we're very, very below the line. And a lot of people probably don't even know about us, is because we just want to make rabbis better rabbis, and so that they could serve their communities, and so that Israel can become a country of communities. And a lot of, I say this a lot, and I'll say it now. I've said the word fundraising 3 times in this whole podcast, so I hope that's okay with you. But when I go fundraising, and I don't have it as easy as some of the other organizations, because it's not so easy to understand why we're doing what we need to do if you don't live in Israel. Meaning many Jews in America, and I was like this, even though I came to Israel 3 or 4 times a year when I was living in Kansas City and Milwaukee. Many American Jews think that community and religion works the same way, in West Rogers Park as it does in Israel. It just happens to be that theirs in Israel, and here we're in West Rogers Park. And the truth of the matter is that it's Shamayim Ba'aretz. So let me just say one last thing.
Yeah,
all these other organizations are saving lives, and they're protecting Israel. And what I believe is that we are saving lives and protecting Israel, because what I always say, it's Zionism 3.0, meaning, yes, we've thank God we built the country and we're safe, more or less. Thank God we have a great army, but our people need social cohesion, and they need help, and they need all sorts of things in order to really remain a strong people. And I think we're seeing a lot of that right now.
Awesome. Rabbi Fine, our time is up, but that's a perfect place to stop. And to thank you again for all you're doing for Klal Yisrael through Barkai. It's an organization that maybe not as many people know about, but hopefully more people will know about after this conversation. And I look forward to seeing you. I hope I'm going to be in Israel next week for Yom Ha'atzmaut. I hope maybe we'll bump into each other at that point.
Yes, we will, because we're both going to be at the Mizrahi Congress. True.
So we'll see each other then. Right. And until then, have a wonderful day, and thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for having me on. And you as well. Continue your Avodat HaKodesh. I very much appreciate you having me on.
Bye-bye.